Dallas, which we didn't believe her. We thought she's just old. But she would always talk about how black magic and black arts was practiced heavily in this area. Heavily, because a lot of people were hiding in the mountains from religious persecution, especially over in Norton, actually. And she believes there's so much darkness in the area. That's why there's so much stuff like that. Because per capita with our population, that many crazy stuff that's happened even recently shouldn't happen. It is quite a bit considering how tiny this area is.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's what I find profoundly interesting about that region is that, again, so much it was like, well, it is, I guess it still is, but it really was a focused point for so much of this stuff, right? Because it was almost a hot spot. Because number one, as we mentioned, like the sin eating is a good example, but there's 100 other examples of things that were brought with people and superstitions that were brought with people and things that were brought with people over. But then, especially as they kind of left more more urban areas, and basically the outcasts were sent to the mountains, right? Or people that just maybe they weren't outcasts, but just people that didn't want to be around other people,
right?
And go live in the mountains. And it's like, you know what? You can't have 14 wives here. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'm just going to live in the mountains.
Right. This is the heart of the mountain.
Right. Like, you can't sacrifice goats. It's okay. I'll go live in the mountains and just leave me.
Right.
Or, some wacky religion that they weren't, too fond of, or some other belief, or maybe, wrong color, wrong creed, wrong something, kind of for the folks of the time. And they would leave and all kind of cluster in the mountains, and people just kind of left each other alone, and they did whatever the fuck they wanted to kind of sort of do.
The mountains will make you go crazy here, I'm telling you.
Yeah. And so you get so many different mixed ideologies. Who knows what concoction you come up with? It's almost like this weird redneck Santeria,
right?
That you get between Pentecostal Christians and Wiccan beliefs. Who knows what it is?
I mean, they used to be like, "Hey, we need a good harvest this year. Let's slaughter a goat."
Right. Yeah.
Or they think that to have a good year, you'd have to take the blood of a virgin and just stuff back in the day. But like you said, with this area, it's all oral traditions.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot of the religious impact here. People don't want the ugly. They don't want it known. So it's oral traditions. And we've been, we've been to some of these old places that are close and just creepy.
Well, it's crazy because even when you listen back to a lot of the old music, even the old kind of banjo guitar kind of music, what you think of bluegrass now, I guess. All the songs are about murder and death and not great stuff and monsters and all this terrible stuff in the woods. What all the songs are about you know what? Yep, that's what happened. We raped and killed her, and they threw her body in the fire. And that's there's a song, perfect song. Let's sing this at church next week.
Thelma, and for people that don't know, Thelma is our great aunt. She is almost 90 now. But she talks about there was a ton of sacrifices and poor, because it's called Poor Valley because they were poor. They're very isolated. Even to this day with expansion, it's still a very isolated place.
Yeah, that's an interesting spot. That's a really
that is an interesting spot.
There's nothing down there, yeah.
There's nothing, and that they used to do crazy stuff out of desperation. Sacrificing children, drowning them in the river for rain and stuff like that for their crops. And there's so many little just hollers. I hate saying hollers.
Hollers.
But saying hollow don't sound right.
That's what I say. I can't say. I still can't say hollow. You sound like even now. Even in Phoenix with my friends that have never heard of the word holler. If I say hollow, I feel like an asshole.
Right, you feel so pretentious.
Down in the hollow.
Right, you're not going to be like, okay, well, we're going to go to Hoot Owl Hollow in Grundy. No, it's Hoot Owl Holler.
That only sounds really good if it's in some book about a land far, far away. You can say that.
Yeah, now, you can't say Sleepy Holler. You have to say Sleepy Hollow on that one.
Well, you can, but people might give you a little bit
strange. A little bit of a look.
Unless you are there, and then they're like, oh, you mean Sleepy Holler. We're going to go watch Sleepy Holler.
There's actually one in Grundy, a road called Sleepy Holler, and there's one called Cigarette Holler too.
Oh my gosh! But you got to say it. You got to say it correctly. Cigarette Holler.
Cigarette. Jewel Ridge has always been a scary spot. Chicken Ridge, Bear Waller, all that's always been a scary spot to me. And so has like Daint and places like that.
Well, what I found was always interesting because when we were kind of especially dumb kids, you go out and you want to go and see these places and you want to scare yourself, and so I can say that I've never truly had any real paranormal experiences. I've had situations where I've scared the fuck out of myself.
Me too.
And I think sometimes you find the situations where you do scare yourself to the point to where you're like, you don't know what's real and what's not. And that in those situations, I remember that because you talk about those areas. When you go into those woods at night, and we did a lot to try to scare the shit out of ourselves. If you go in hoping to be scared, and you were scared, right? You go in and you find something that scares the shit out of you, and then there's 10 fucking 16-year-olds running full speed out of the woods trying to find a car to get the hell out of there because they found another Appalachian term, a haint. They found a ghost or a haint. They found something in the mountains.
If somebody said they think they heard something, everybody runs.
But it is interesting though. It's funny that you say it because those areas in particular, when you're driving they're desolate. These just desolate roads. There's no street lights. It's just mountainous, curvy roads that go from pavement to gravel to mud if you don't know where you're at.
And the denseness of our forests, it is not like California. When you're in our forests, you can't see 10 feet in front of you because they are so dense.
It's thick. It never burns. It rarely burns. Let me say that. It rarely burns. So the undergrowth is so thick. It's just like briars and thorn bushes and stuff growing up. It's almost like rainforest is the only way that I can describe it.
Yeah, it is. It's so thick out here.
It's the forest is always, the woods, they're always damp. There's always growth. It's exactly that. It's thick. So you wander into those things in the middle of the night, and we did with frequency. You
can't take lights, because that makes the ghost go away.
Shit out of yourself. Yeah, you'd scare the shit out of yourself. We would literally pile into cars and just go like, we're going out in the woods and we're going to try to find ghosts.
Go to Whitewood School, Bathhouse in Jewel Valley and stuff, or Reynolds Ridge where that guy shot himself. See, places there, I would always get scared because somebody would be like, so we're all like, and run. But I never had a real, it'd be scary, but not until the Adam stuff. And that stuff, even when I'd go to those haunted places, other than that witch's grave that he said was his lover, that scared the shit out of me. But it was always at the house it would happen.
It's funny though, because so many of those areas that we went to, you kind of later find out, they're like, oh yeah, there's some rumor or some superstition associated with that area. You find that out later and you're like, really? That's crazy. You go to these kind of old buildings and you're like, oh yeah, this happened there.
Like the witch's house in the cove. Yeah. She supposedly sacrificed her son or something.
Yeah, you don't realize those that kind of folklore, that lore until kind of later, and you're like, well, who knows? Maybe you didn't scare the shit out of yourself.
Maybe I'm glad I didn't know it beforehand, or else I wouldn't.
So there's so much of that lore kind of there in particular, so I don't know. I never experienced a lot of stuff there, but it's just interesting, and I've never really had those experiences in general, but it's just interesting the amount of stories there. So the first episode that we released was on some of the hauntings in Abington in particular. And talking about just some of those, and I think it's just that there's so much history, and there's so much just old stuff, and so much conflict, and so much trauma, kind of in those areas. That if you do believe in that stuff, I mean, it seems like those would be the magic spots for that to happen. There's all kinds of not so great stuff happening.
That's what my friend's great grandma said. She said there's been so much darkness in this area. So much bloodshed, so much betrayal and dark arts practiced up a secret in the woods that she believes that's why so much, because like we talked, it is a lot of stuff for the size of this area.
Yeah.
That kind, and it's not just like, okay, this dude killed his wife for cheating. It's like crazy. Like just recently, this kid made a bomb and accidentally blew himself up with it. He's alive because he's mad at cheerleaders. And when the police went to his house, there's pieces of his flesh on the ceiling and stuff. Just crazy stuff like that. And she believed in the Cove, Maiden Springs. There was a battle fought there.
Yeah.
He said there's just been so much bloodshed in the mountains that it came back. She believes there's darkness over it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it. I think that's what you probably see a lot of.
Yeah.
You see that it probably, I don't know if it came back as much as it might have just never went anywhere.
Exactly.
You see so much of that kind of in the mountains that there's always this very, I'm proud of where I come from, but there is so much of that kind of feeling there that it's always been depressed, and people are always, and there's an image that was kind of perpetuated that wasn't true about kind of Appalachian people, and it still gets perpetuated by the media and kind of general stuff that, hillbillies are dumb and they don't work and they sleep in sunshine, and that's obviously not true. But there is something about the area that, the economy's always suffered. People have always kind of fought to be out of, they've always fought to have anything, right? They've always had to like scrap and claw to have anything. And the area's been afflicted with a lot of tragedy and a lot of battles and a lot of different stuff like that, and then obviously with it's strange to me because I mentioned we're going to Tombstone, and Tombstone, as much as people like to think it's like a shoot 'em up like Western town, Tombstone is actually a mining town. All the deaths in Tombstone didn't come from other than the famous shootout there. Like 99% of the deaths in Tombstone were from mining. Right. And
we're a mining community.
And that's what I say, tragedy and mining go hand in hand. Right. And you see a lot of that stuff in Tombstone. You hear a lot of the same kind of stories, which I find interesting. You can go to the graveyards there, and you can look through the graveyards there, and you can hear the stories about, that dude died in this collapse, that person died in this, and then this exploded over here and killed like 20 people, and that's all this whole side of the cemetery. And then you see that when you go to Tombstone too. So
right.
It's interesting to see some of the carryovers between just the mining towns kind of in general.
On
the tragedy that follows
Netflix, there's a movie called Mine 9. And it's about a mining accident that happened. Dad has been to that mine. He had worked there.
Really?
And stuff. And for people that don't know, my father actually got crippled in the coal mines from a rock fall that killed the people behind him. We've had that one guy a few years ago got killed by being in front of a miner. We've had a lot of mining accidents, even modern times.
Yeah, I don't know what the stats are, and I probably should consider my day job, but I don't know what the stats are on mining. But there's lots of deaths every year.
I think it's like the second most. It's in the top 5 like deadliest jobs or something like that.
Yeah, there's lots of deaths, and then there's lots of maimings every year, but. Usually, the unfortunate part about mines is that you'll see them like when you have something like that happen, like you said, like with your dad in general, you'll have like 6 people hurt and like 10 people killed, and like one. It's almost rare for it to be like a one person thing.
Exactly,
it's almost always a tragedy, right? When something goes wrong, it's almost always a tragedy, and you hear of that with frequency throughout that region. And then if you buy into some of this kind of notion of I don't even know what the theory is, but it's this kind of notion of the way energy travels and all that stuff. The entire area is sitting on top of limestone caves and mine shafts throughout, and all these kind of underwater flowing rivers and kind of all this.
That was Dad's big fear, is that it would flood.
Yeah.
But if you look at Buchanan mine, it has the highest methane in there than any other mine in the world. They have to be so careful what they take so it will not make a spark. The air will catch fire.
Yeah, it'll just explode. Yeah. Well, and that's what I think is interesting. When I was doing the research on some of the Abington stuff, to find that so many of those little areas are connected through underground limestone caves. Like the Barter and the Martha are connected through caves that have since collapsed, but there's a demonic spirit that hides out in the caves that's That's pissed.
They've always said the Martha is haunted.
There's a lot of Martha stories.
But like, there's a Buchanan, a Buck One mine that you go in Grundy, Oakwood, and then you end up under Claypool Hill Walmart, which is about a